It's Hasselt, or jointly between Hasselt University in Germany and Northwest University in Potchefstroom, South Africa. And the work he did was looking at nature-based cultural practices in relation to frogs, looking at folklore, totemism, the muti trade, songs and poetry, and a lot more. And Fortunate's going to be talking to us about the last 5 or 6 years of his work in relation to this. So welcome, Fortunate.
Thanks for the introduction, Roger. Good morning, everyone. Bringing in science communication, local languages and cultures into herpetology has been quite a fun journey. It's been going on for just over 6 years now. And this is how it started. So many years ago, I joined the Herpetology group in Northwest University, and they were, they still are doing good work in systematics and parasitology, so the parasites of the frogs and the reptiles, and all of that feeds into conservation. So it would be pointless for me to try and do what's already been done. It'll also be a waste of resources to replicate. So to carve out my own niche, the focus was on bringing social elements, and once those social elements are brought in, then they can also inform conservation. So the motivation, obviously I like frogs and reptiles, but that's not a very scientific motivation or a very, has no worth in policy. So our National Environmental Management Act has these principles that make provision for inclusion of social elements. And this is just 2 of the clauses from those principles that make reference to including cultural and social interest in environmental management and making sure decisions cater for everyone and take into consideration all types of knowledge, including cultural knowledge or traditional knowledge. So the social elements, the aim was to be able to communicate herpetology to people that don't use all the fancy words that we use, and to understand the nature-based cultural practices that relate to frogs and reptiles, and also understand how local languages speak about frogs and reptiles. And one of the things that come up immediately is that both in nature-based cultural practices and in local languages, there's local names of wildlife, and those local names can in turn be used to communicate to non-specialists about frogs and reptiles. So how does this get done? How do you include all these social elements into herpetology? For one, it's not conventional, where most of my colleagues have set protocols they use. Their methods are very directed, and it's not like that with me. My methods add a lot of spice to whatever's being done. So think of it this way: you have a recipe book for your kitchen and your cooking. So how I do it is I read the recipe book and then I throw it away, and then add all the spices that I like into my cooking. So it's a mix of methods that are used in herpetology by my colleagues, and some other methods from social sciences. So I put a star on them because these don't strictly belong to social sciences, like these 2 can be said to belong to linguistics. But broadly, we can say that I combine social science and natural science and methods, and that makes for spicy herpetology. Okay, so here's my recipe book. Using stats, a review of existing literature, and some fancy stuff on the computer. One of the things that became apparent was that the cultural salience or the cultural importance of frogs, reptiles, and all other animals somehow has an influence on accumulation of biodiversity data. So cultural salience, in a way, has an influence on this data that's needed for a lot of conservation-related studies and also ecological studies. And it's not clear how yet, but I was with these fancy graphs, it shows that there is a relationship between the two. And surprisingly, these graphs suggest that cultural salience has a larger influence on accumulating biodiversity data than scientific interest. But there's also, these two also interact. So right now it's kind of difficult to sort of separate the two because they also interact to influence accumulation of biodiversity data. Another nice dish that came from spicy herpetology was that while looking at existing literature and bringing in language planning, we were able to show that by producing material for life sciences or frogs and reptile studies in local languages, it also extends beyond life sciences because it has value for developing local languages into languages that can be used for learning and teaching. And that led to this part of the work where we looked at library books in South Africa to see if they provide socially inclusive or linguistically inclusive chances to learn about the environment. And they actually don't. Most of them will help if you understand English. A few of them will help if you understand Afrikaans, and very few of them will help if you want to learn in any of the other 9 languages that we have, 9 local languages that we have in the country. And that's not a good thing because English literacy is really low in our country. So it would help if you could learn in your home language. Then we went to, this is the royal we now, to traditional medicine markets in urban areas to start a catalog of what frogs and reptiles are being used for traditional medicine. And before we went there, all the identifications of the frogs and reptiles in traditional medicine markets were based on morphology. So I brought in DNA and I looked at previous literature to see what has already been cataloged from there, and some ethnographic analysis also to look at what people say about the different frogs and reptiles that are used in traditional medicine. And the results of the DNA barcoding, they showed, well, this is like probably 25% of the results, but immediately they show that some of the local names they use for the frogs and reptiles are actually incorrect, because this specimen was said to be a mamba. I was told it was a mamba, but looking at what the DNA results show, it's actually not it wasn't a mamba, it was a rinkels. And another thing that was apparent was that some of these traditional remedies don't always use frogs or reptile tissue like they say. And the problem is that because they get cut up, one specimen will get cut up into smaller pieces, and those smaller pieces will get sold. So sometimes you find a piece of tissue, it's just bone and muscle, and you ask what this is, and a lot of the times they either tell you that it's a monitor lizard, or they just say it's a snake. But there's no skin on the bone, so it's quite difficult to confirm what they're saying. But with DNA barcoding, we were able to show that what I was told was a piece of monitor lizard turned out to be a dussie. And again, what I was told was a monitor lizard, turned out to be a striped polecat. And this sort of replacement of the ingredients of traditional medicine was not very apparent in traditional medicine that uses animals. It was known from traditional medicine that uses plants, but from on the animal side, it wasn't that apparent. So far, I don't know if this makes a difference to the traditional remedy itself or whether it poses risk to people. This is work that I'll do later on. So another outcome which used our knowledge of biology and biology of frogs and reptiles and some ethnographic analysis and some language planning revealed that there's an organized way that the local names group frogs and reptiles. And the most obvious one was that frogs and reptiles are grouped in the local languages, are grouped according to their similarities. So the similarities that people observe are normally what's used to group those frogs and reptiles. To give you an example, there's a frog called Isinana. So Isinana is not just, at first I thought it was just for one frog species, but it turned out to be all the frogs that dig and live underground. So it was the shovel-nosed frog and the rain frogs. They were all called Isinana in the different languages that we have. Of course, the pronunciation of the name and the spelling would change according to language. Another interesting thing that came from there that what we thought was folklore is actually not folklore, not all of it anyway. I mean, the folklore that says frogs bring lightning, that it's difficult to understand where they came from, so that counts as folklore. But the idea that frogs are rainmakers actually looks like it's an observation of frog behavior that is explained using whatever knowledge is available at that moment. So some frogs will start being active just before rain falls. And if you see that a couple of times that, oh, here's a frog, then the rain comes, here's a frog, then the rain comes. But without the knowledge that frogs will start being active before rain because the temperatures become cooler and humidity rises, you think that frog is bringing the rain, but it's actually the frog is just active because conditions are favorable. So at that point, okay, this rain, I'm seeing a frog again, it's going to bring rain. And once, as time goes on with knowledge of biology, you see that, okay, it's not, that's not the case actually. And then something like that is actually not folklore. It's an observation of animal behavior explained without the knowledge of animal biology. And this is where the most progress has been made. And it's slow progress actually when you look at it, but because this work started 6 years ago and it's only now coming to an end, and I can focus on other parts. And when you relate that to an earlier slide, this is an understanding of nature-based cultural practices. It's an understanding of how local languages frame frogs and reptiles, and it goes back to inform communication of frogs and reptiles. And this is one of the ways that all that work has informed how we present frogs and reptiles to people that are not specialists. It's a book based on how the Zululand communities understand frogs and relate to frogs, and it is written in their own language. So that problem that we saw, that not a lot of material are available to learn about wildlife in your own language, we're trying to solve it. And this is one of the ways that it gets solved. So to write that book, we had to go to the communities and ask the Zululand community, say, okay, please teach us about frogs in your area. And once they taught us about frogs, we could blend in our knowledge and produce that book. And then go back to the community and have that, what they taught us, combined to what we know, have it as a way of informing this communication of herpetology to non-specialists. Another outcome is this little relationship that you can see between the local names and the scientific names. And this actually works both ways, because if you are a herpetologist and you want to know the different names that people use in the area that you're working on and how they relate to the scientific names that you usually work with, this would be a nice comparison that you see, okay, the Breviceps and the Hemices are actually called Isinana in this area, and the reason for that is because they're fossorial. The people saw that they are fossorial, and you can also look at, you can say, okay, all the reed frogs and the leaf-folding frogs have a specific name in isiZulu and Xitsonga, and the name comes from the reason of the name is because people always see them in reeds, and that's why they got this specific name. So I like this part because it not only informs communication to non-specialists, but it also informs communication to some of my colleagues. And for the part that would inform conservation planning, so all of this work can be grouped into these categories. You can increase them or decrease them depending on the criteria used for grouping them. But if you want to, if you're working on conservation planning and you say, okay, let's include, let's have a social element, then you can say, okay, so we have these social elements that are consumptive towards animals, so they might pose a conservation threat. And you have the non-consumptive ones, which either don't have an impact on conservation or have a positive impact on conservation. If we want to inform conservation planning and look at just one example of how traditional practice or traditional norm would inform conservation, you can take totemism, which is the most common one in all the different languages that we have and different cultures that we have. So with totemism, people see themselves as having a relationship with a certain animal, or that certain animal is seen as a member of the family. And so in this region of the country that we're in, the mole snake in some homes is embraced to a point where if it comes into the house, no one bothers it until it leaves by itself. And there's also examples of people maintaining two piles of wood. One pile would be for cooking and keeping warm in the house, and the other pile of wood is just kept there for the snake to live, because the snake is kin, is part of the family, and it needs to have a home. And with totemism is that it's taboo to kill an animal that is your totem, and so you need to protect it. And protecting an animal means protecting the place where it lives. So from a conservation perspective, it means there's this culture of care towards an animal, and there's this culture of protecting the habitat that the animal lives in. And if you try to relate that to whatever policies we have already, you can relate to sustainable development goals of protecting habitats that animals live in. And it also relates to national environmental management principle number 4G, which says that decisions must recognize all forms of knowledge. And our national biodiversity strategy also has an objective that says that you need to have an effective knowledge, and that knowledge in that sense would include the cultural knowledge to support your conservation. So in this part of the world, if you want to change conservation planning towards mole snake, then you would include how the Majola people view the mole snake. And in that way, it's sort of, from a cultural perspective, it's respectful of the culture. From a social perspective, it's socially inclusive, because if we look at how conservation is generally practiced, it's practiced from the perspective of the animal, and sort of people start to feel that, okay, you are putting animals before us, so there is no point for us to buy into your conservation initiatives. And that, if you don't have buy-in from your local community, then your conservation initiative will not go very far. So to round it all up, what happens with social elements is that it brings in a perspective that that informs conservation, and it's not just hearsay, it's not just stories, it's science-based, and it when you look at the bigger picture, then of the research that we do at Northwest University and with SAIAB, is that you have these two existing arms of herpetology that feed conservation, and you also have this part that also informs conservation. And then in that way, you end up having a conservation approach that was how our national policy actually intended it, which we currently don't have that much of. So we have really nice policies, but the implementation and planning around those policies is not as nice. And so the work, this is the we that I keep referring to. I couldn't do all this work by myself. There was a lot of people involved, a lot of organizations and institutions involved, and a lot of sleepless nights. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Fortunate. Does anybody have any questions? Albert?
Thanks for that. Yeah, interesting indeed. I particularly like the fact that you brought up the benefits that are linked with the totemism, because we have exactly the same sort of way of doing things where I come from. But my question relates to the are there any cases or instances where you've done barcoding and then you found that they've collected something that's critically endangered, and in such cases, do you report them to the authorities? And also, do they have permits to collect? And I'm just trying to understand how the whole thing works.
So they don't have permits to collect. It's currently a big fight between, well, in Gauteng, it's a big fight between traditional health practitioners and conservation practitioners, where there is no collaboration. It's just the conservation part going in and confiscating everything, and then traditional health practitioners go back and just collect more. So there needs to be some sort of collaboration there, where there's a permitting system for traditional health purposes. But from the barcoding, there wasn't any critically endangered frogs or reptiles that were identified. But from previous literature, there were 3 species that were endangered. And I think either 4 or 5 species that were not from South Africa. So they were brought into the country. And it is hoped with this work, as it goes on, that we can work out a way for permitting to be sort of modified to cover this traditional element, because the law already covers it, but the permitting doesn't. And this constant fight of confiscating and then the traditional health practitioners go collect more is not really helpful towards the biodiversity.
Okay, how do I answer? Does anybody online have any questions? You ask in the chat. Okay. Yeah, following on from that, fortunately, I mean, all your Baroness, they're all sightings listed, aren't they? So they shouldn't be in the trade at all, but they're clearly well embedded in the trade.
Yeah, they
How do sightings deal with that? Because they're not going to stop it all.
No, they're not. And it's quite clear that confiscating doesn't help, because it's been going on for quite a while. And it's not just the monitor lizards, because while I was there, I could clearly identify that there is a South African rock python. I don't have a permit for it. I need to avoid it. That is a Nile crocodile. I don't have a permit for it, and I need to avoid it. So mostly collected the stuff that I couldn't ID immediately. But that just shows that we're sitting with a problem, and I think it's bigger in Gauteng because the big fight between conservation and traditional health practitioners is in Gauteng. In KZN, there isn't so much of a fight, so the confiscations are not as common on that side, and so now we just need to talk to each other and see how we can move forward and have permitting cover this traditional element.
Yeah. Do you have some question?
Dion, you can unmute and ask your question.
Thanks. I would like to appreciate the work that you are doing, bringing science communication to local languages and cultures. It's really exciting. But I'm interested in the remark that you made regarding folklore, because it would seem that the bigger drive behind your work is actually to recognize different forms of knowledges, ways of knowing. But then when you say, for example, giving an example of frogs being active just before the rain comes, and the people in the communities saying frogs bring rain, and your remark being that it is because of the lack of knowledge, biological expertise, biological knowledge around frog behavior. Doesn't that in a way actually other this knowledge that this bigger project is trying to appreciate? Because I would imagine that even within that community of non-experts, where you collect these names, there will actually be experts who may actually have maybe a more nuanced understanding of frog behavior. At surface level, they may say the frogs are bringing rain, but I'm sure there might be other people who know much better who will actually be able to say, no, the rain brings frogs, and that's why the frogs are starting to behave like this, because they are already sensing that the rain is about to come. So my point is that we may need to actually dig deeper into what we recognize as folklore, because taking it at surface level might actually miss more nuanced understanding of IKS.
All right, thanks, Dion. If you noticed my phrasing of things that the words that I use, I avoided saying non-experts. I said non-specialists. So non-specialists in the sense of of herpetology, because I recognize that it's also a form of knowledge. And what I said was that it's an observation explained without the biological knowledge in the sense of biological sciences, but there is the knowledge on the indigenous side. So I try to avoid othering, and because it's a big problem we have. So I try to avoid othering, and because most of our policy relies on applying scientific merit to what we say. So the approach is that you look at the local knowledge we have, and you try to explain it using the biological knowledge that we have. And then in that way, when you take it to the people that decide on conservation planning, you say to them, okay, this is the local knowledge we have. This is the scientific understanding we can apply to it. And in the end, we have science-based recommendations of how the local knowledge can inform conservation planning. Something like, folklore. So right now, there is no easier way to phrase folklore. It's just usually when something is misunderstood, not by the local culture, but by modern knowledge. When something is misunderstood, it gets grouped as folklore. But once some of that folklore of frogs and reptiles, once I'm able to understand it from another perspective, then it gets moved from folklore, and currently a lot of it is going to observations of animal behavior explained based on local knowledge and without the biological knowledge. So something like the example I made of frogs bringing lightning, it's impossible for me to understand, to bring biological understanding to that. So it stays on folklore, not out of disrespect, but out of lack of understanding. So yeah, there is possibly a need to go deeper, but the thing is, we will get stuck trying to understand it from another perspective, from a modern knowledge perspective. Some of the deeper understandings that we will find will be really difficult to explain. I hope that was the satisfaction, an answer to your satisfaction, Dion?
Through you, Chair, yes, it goes some way. I really appreciate especially your clarification around experts and non-specialists. I think as a linguist, I should have picked that. But still, I'll challenge you further and say, maybe instead of seeing your important work as bringing communication to non-specialists, I think with time, maybe as part of transforming or decolonizing, pardon, the use of these buzzwords, the knowledge, maybe we need to also appreciate that you are also getting knowledge such that it shouldn't perpetually be seen as folklore. I think it should also add something even to the discipline of biology, instead of making that distinction between biological knowledge and local knowledge, folklore or IKS versus modern or scientific knowledge. So this distinction, the binaries between modern, old, science, non-science, and so on. Something maybe to think about in the future, but I really, really appreciate your work. And I would like to engage you even further, especially on issues of language. And if you are at SAIAB, we are actually not more than 200 meters apart. I'm in the School of Languages next door. So if you have time, you can still engage.
As do you know, terminology needs to be worked on. This is a fight that is ongoing, but it's not a sense of, like, I didn't use the word teaching local communities. That is a really horrible term. There's one slide where I'm speaking to guides from Zululand, and I said we went to them and asked them to teach us about how they relate to frogs and reptiles. And then we could blend in our knowledge from the scientific perspective, and that led to a book of frogs and reptiles based on how the local community views it. So it's not teaching the local community, it's communicating our work to the local community. But thanks, Dion. If I have some free time, I will definitely come say hi. I hope you have coffee ready.
I do. You are welcome.
Thank you very much for your talk. I'm just asking, from your interactions with medical, cultural medical practitioners, right? You were bringing in your perspective from the biological side as well as trying to learn from their side as well. So you did mention that in some of their practices, they have like names. You all know in culturally, you have names that you refer to multiple species and children have one name. So when you bring your knowledge to them and explain to them that this particular name that refers to multiple species, and you tell them that actually refers to a larger number of scientific species, does that for them, does that bring any value to them, or they are okay in their practices? Does the actual scientific species, like that distinction between different titles makes, does that bring any value to them, or as far as their practices go, it doesn't matter the exact scientific species that they're using, as long as it's a particular snake in a particular area, or yeah.
So the understanding of local names has more value for us on the conservation side than it does for local communities, because to be able to understand the different species, you need to constantly monitor them, and from a local perspective, there is no monitoring of any species, just what you see. It looks like another animal that you saw the other day, and in that way it gets grouped. So with the Zululand community, they were very appreciative to learn that what they referred to as Isinana is actually more than 5 species, and also we could play the calls of those 5 species, and they appreciated that what they thought was insects is actually these frogs that they call Isinana. So from a curiosity perspective, people appreciate the new, sorry, bad word. They appreciate this perspective of saying, okay, what you thought is 1 is actually 5. But beyond that, it would have value for us from a conservation perspective, because when we collaborate with local communities, both parties need to understand that, okay, we're focused on species 1 and not these other 4. And so it's more of a conservation motivation than it's actually a cultural motivation to have to understand those names.
I think this will help the modernized animals that we have now. You know, the old ones, you know, from here, the guys who are going to universities who are sangomos, I think this information will help them a lot.
Yeah.
I'm not sure about the older ones.
Actually, the older ones, the people that I spoke to were very open-minded. Like the question that I asked when in view of endangered species is would you be willing to substitute this species that is endangered for one that is more common in your remedies? And you know, they were very open-minded to it, and they're very intrigued to see a young person, very appreciative of the lessons they give. So some of them are not are not, sorry for this word, but are not old and stubborn. Some of them actually like seeing me and seeing me there. So we'll be able to reach some, but not all.
Thank you for the talk.
you.
It was a lot of interesting work you're doing, and I could see how you contribute to conservation more. So is there a reason you started translating the book in Zululand? Is there more endangered frogs there? Or
So
let me just add the last one. And are there any plans to translate to other languages?
I'll answer question 2 first. So yes, there is work currently being done to translate to the other languages. And the reason for doing a book on Zululand first is not because Zulu, that is not that's not my culture. I am from Limpopo, I'm Mopedi, and that book almost got me disowned because my family was not impressed. But the reason is that KZN is the hotspot for amphibian diversity. And that book came from a pilot study. So we needed to show funders that, okay, your money is not going out, it's not being thrown into a fire. This is what we can do. And if we went to say Gauteng, it would be a very, very small book because there aren't that many frog species there. So we went to the biodiversity hotspot for frogs and reptiles, and isiZulu is quite a dominant language, so that also contributes to contributed to making that pilot a success.
Good for snakes.
Yeah, I definitely agree.
Yeah, I think you have a date with Pressure, which you can organise later. I wanted to ask about your mole snake as well. So why do people wish to be mole snakes? What is it about a mole snake? So far what I understand from totemism is that if an animal has desirable traits or characters, that's how the whole idea of totem started. Is people would see these favorable traits in these different animals, and in that way they wanted those traits for themselves. And with time, that animal became to be seen as a projection of themselves. So they are the animal and the animal is them. And so I don't know the reason behind a mole snake, but I do know the reason behind a lion totem. And an elephant totem is strength and strength and grace. And that's so the people that see themselves as a lion clan proclaim that they are as strong as a lion and as brave as a lion. Yeah. So it was those favorable characters that they see, and they projected themselves as that animal. Are you losing, just one last, are you losing knowledge?
Am I losing knowledge?
Not you personally, but are we losing this knowledge?
Oh yeah, we are definitely losing it at a very alarming rate, because a lot of it is not documented. It's shared by word of mouth, and it's held by the elders in the family. And well, moving away from rural areas has become really fancy now. So when you move away from those rural areas, you move away from the source of that knowledge. And as the elders pass away because of age, that knowledge goes with them. So it should be documented more than it's being documented currently.
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
Yeah, just a follow-up on what Rogers mentioned, on the totemism kind of thing. Just the potential conflict. I'm just imagining a situation where I get to a household and they say that pile of wood is a house for mambas. And yeah, I'm just trying to process whether there is no potential conflict. Because if I'm lion as my totem, I may not necessarily want to associate with the black mambas and all these other. So yeah,
Well, there are shortfalls of using totemism as bringing totemism into conservation planning, and it's the main shortfall is that it's limited to that specific clan. So the Majola clan will be very protective of the mole snake, but the Ndlovu clan does not care about the mole snake and probably get killed. But in the more rural parts of the country, it could work out that you have these local ordinances, because usually clans that belong to the same totem tend to settle in the same area. But in something like Johannesburg, it would not work because that's a multicultural city. You would have the elephants and the lions and the mole snakes going at each other, then saying, "Oh, just please leave our ancestor alone." Is that a question? Just a comment.
Well, fortunate, thank you very, very much. That was a fascinating talk.
Thanks, Roger.
And I think you've got some more questions coming afterwards too.
It looks like it.
And very best of luck for your continuing work. I think you've got a lot of work in Kruger Park coming up, haven't you?
Yeah.
Yeah.
A ton of work in Kruger Park.
Thank you.
Thanks, Roger. Thanks, everyone, for joining.
Well done.
Yeah, Roger.